Thank you, Jeff.
Of course.
It's great to have everyone here. This is a conversation about the AIDS monument, as Jeff has said, and the history thereof, and the process of taking it from germination of a conversation years ago to a really fine public opening uh, the other day, with incredible support from the city of West Hollywood, in particular, Rick Abramson, the city architect, and Michael Barker, our client on this project, who is steady as it goes. Just a terrific client and it was a great project all in. UAP is the Urban Arts Projects. That's the one of the entities that Daniel Tobin is in charge of, and he and Daniel Tobin is the artist that brought the concept to fruition here. The project was overseen by MGAC, the project manager, and PCL was the contractor. And if this is a commercial for anyone, it'd be a commercial for them. They did a fabulous job. We are honored to be the architect, structural engineer, electrical engineer, landscape, and civil engineer as well. Just really supporting the vision that Dan brought to bear, and this is off obviously on AIA Orange County's platform. So what we wanted to do is have this conversation, and Rogerio and Daniel talk about the germination of the idea for the monument. And we get to see some early concept drawings that Daniel brought to bear in the competition. And then from those celestial conversations down to anchor bolts, LPA is going to talk about the delivery of the monument, again, with others involved, talk about bronze, travertine, and light. And then Roger is going to comment on how the community has received that. Then we'll, as Q&A, go all the way through, not just at the end. So, Rogerio, can you escort us through this conversation, the brief history, if you will, of the AIDS and HIV, and just your thoughts looking back, and how what was going on back then that you'd like to share with the folks on the call?
Well, I mean, many of us remember the 80s and how difficult it was. And, fast forward, I don't need to go through that, but or recount what we experienced in the 80s. But in regards to the AIDS stories, the AIDS monument, it was an idea that was really sort of inspired by the fact that the city of San Francisco and the city of New York were implementing or had implemented AIDS monuments. And Los Angeles, and in particular West Hollywood, which was hit very hard during that era, and saw, we don't know how many thousands of people we lost in the city of West Hollywood. And Dr. Gottlieb, who's a resident of Los Angeles and a resident of West Hollywood, I think at that time, was the doctor that identified AIDS as an
Mm,
actual disease. So 15 years ago, Craig Doherty, who founded FAM, the Foundation for the AIDS Monument, talked to a couple of council members at the city of West Hollywood, John Duran and John D'Amico, and engaged them in this idea of creating a monument in the city of West Hollywood. And again, like I mentioned, that was 15 years ago. And slowly, the board built out to, at one point it was 18 people. And we started doing the fundraising effort. And I was the chair of the design committee and did the RFP for the artists, sent out the RFP. We went through a whole selection process and selected Daniel. Then we started developing the project. And, like you said, not long ago, we had the opening. So generally, that's sort of a big overview of how it started, why it started, and how we got to where we got.
very good. Um, then we can toggle over to some of the artist concepts. Daniel, these are some of the images that you sent us, and I think this is a good starting point for your conversation.
Yeah, for sure. I suppose I first heard about the project back in maybe 2013, 2014, when I responded to the RFP. A very exciting brief, I have to say, because it was touching a whole lot of things, I held dear to myself, both professionally and personally. And the brief was imagining a monument for HIV/AIDS in West Hollywood, and something that would engage and commemorate and celebrate activism and talk to the community stories. So it was a pretty amazing brief to be responding to. I don't know if you want to talk about the competition process. I
Sure,
think
whatever. We got time. Yeah.
we've all been through that process. It's throw your hat in the ring and hope that you might be the right person for the job. So and that happens rarely. And so it was wonderful to be then connected to FAM, Rogerio, Mark Lehman, and the rest of the board, and start the conversations around the monument. So very thankful to be involved at that stage and start those conversations.
It's
I think
interesting. It's interesting, Daniel. Early on, these are, five of, call it banner points, if you will. But the fourth one, encourage conversation, which is what we're doing right now. And I know that you've been in the gay community, been having a conversation all along, but it's this monument allows that conversation to, I think, have a broader footprint, if you will.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
I think actually, if we go to the next slide,
Yeah.
we can start to talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think two, and Rogerio, you can join in at any time, because there's been many voices in the design process of this monument. So I'm talking from my point of view, but there's lots of points of view, and many of those voices are seen in the outcome of the design and what you see on the ground. But when I first submitted really rough sketches, which are the two images on the right, and that was to enable being shortlisted for the project. They were done just on trace and photocopied, and they're pretty small, so it's really hard to understand them. But the two images are really I connected with in my research. The top image is of the AIDS quilt in DC, I think taken in 1987. And there was a quote that went along with it, which I can't quite get right, but it was about you know, uh, under incomprehensible loss that was happening among the gay community, and no way to a very difficult way to manage emotions and memorialize those people that were lost. And this image of the quilts laid out, I think over 2,000 quilts at the time, and people wandering through that, trying to understand, what their community was going through. So that sort of activation and connection, that sort of community gathering space was became a key part of the idea for the monument. And then the image below it's taken in 1983. It's actually in Central Park, but it was the first mass gathering and from a memorial for a person who died from AIDS. So it was a candlelight vigil, and that was a very key part of what was happening in Los Angeles at the time. I learned through the process, and Rogerio could talk about this as well, but there were candlelight vigils starting up in Santa Monica Boulevard and walking down to the park
Mm.
as community sort of struggled with what was happening.
Walking down to West Hollywood Park, ending up in West Hollywood Park.
I understand that was the
Yeah,
case for
yeah,
Rogerio. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, throughout West Hollywood.
yeah.
It was the peaceful protests of the time. Now we're trying to do our own versions in our current time, but that's what was happening at that point. And just to go back to the RFP, I wrote the RFP, like, gosh, it was like 10 years ago, 12 years ago now. We sent it out to 24 selected artists that we knew could bring something to the table that we could actually work with. And then we shortened it down to four. And we ended up working with Dan because there was there was this gesture that, or not gesture, this idea that these what Dan called traces were sort of memories of the spirits that we had lost. And for me,
Mm.
particularly being from the Northwest and growing up with Haida Indian art, where totem sort of represents the spirits that, came before us, it really it resonated. And one of the things that the foundation decided early on is that the idea of trying to capture everyone's name in LA and particularly West Hollywood that had passed away would be, a very difficult task, and we were bound to lose, miss somebody along the way, and we didn't want that. And also the really pillars of the monument are to remember those who we lost, to celebrate those groups of people that stood up for everyone that passed away and those who are living with AIDS, and to educate future generations. And Dan's proposal really seemed to be, well, it was the one that most connected to that ethos that we were trying to work around. And like Dan said, the development of the project was, a collaboration, led by Daniel, and we ended up where we are now. Part of, one of the things that you see in the traces is that, there's a little light element at the top, and that's um, a way of commemorating the candlelight vigils, which were a way of people sort of expressing, their grief and hopes, and as a community at that time. So we wanted to commemorate that. So the monument itself is, you know, it's a place to reflect, but it's also, we imagined it as a place like during Gay Pride, it could be potentially a dance party. It could
Mm.
have many faces depending on
Interesting.
what's happening around it. If we have, John D'Amico was very specific that he wanted, a podium where, protests could happen in the future. And ironically, we're in the situation that we are now where there are protests, and that podium is perfectly placed where you could gather, a large number of people along San Vicente Boulevard and use the podium with the AIDS monument behind you, sort of a reflection of another time where we fought for our rights. And are we again in that type of situation now? So it has multiple connections in different ways to different aspects of the things that we've gone through as a community.
Yeah. And so, thank you, Rogerio. So on this, Daniel, is this an early, more refinement of the proposal?
Yeah, I think it was an early,
Yeah.
from those early sketches, which sort of accepted the park landscape as it was, albeit without the pool. This I had learned that the site was a more constrained plaza, I suppose. It sat alongside San Vicente, and this idea of making a place that could be approached from all angles and all sides, that like Rogerio said, was a place of gathering, of mourning, of community, of protest, a space that would at times be reverent, but also at times be celebratory. So this and certainly I think we had over 200 traces in the early
Yeah.
stage of this, and people probably would have had to fight their way through that space. But the idea of the trace, as Rogerio so eloquently said, was about a memory, a trace left by someone, or an idea of a past presence. So those became, like community members. And, this is, you know, the challenges of the AIDS crisis are universal stories. They're shared around the world. Minorities victimized, ignored, and forgotten. And so those stories are sort of embedded into the idea of this place as well.
So are all those stories on the web page now, Rosario, the FAM web page?
A lot of them are,
Yeah.
not all of them,
Because you can't tell all those stories in this monument. There has to be another
Yeah,
outlet.
they're on the website. You can go to the
Yeah.
website and you can hear different stories from, different people. Again, sort of the task of capturing all the names and all the stories.
Yeah.
That's, monumental in and of itself. So
Yeah.
we have tried to do that. And the idea of doing it on site, again, just seemed beyond what the actual site could manage. And luckily, the digital world, is sort of this constantly expanding kind of
Yep.
library. So it works perfectly for that right now.
Yeah. Excellent.
And there's certainly a narrative across the site, from the Arrival Plaza all the way through to the Respite Grove, that gives people indicators of where they are and what they're seeing and why this place is special. And I think, people are curious and they will search for more information, and it doesn't all need to be accessible on site.
Yeah.
So I suppose this is fairly straightforward. It's showing the plan and an elevation of that early concept. It was being placed alongside the library, and the new community center was proposed at that time, beside the library. That had yet to be built when we were designing.
Mm.
And we also had three clearly separated fields, which gradually became two, and the shape and the form of the plaza changed as we sort of understood more about the site and had discussions with FAM and the city. And so you see this image from above is pretty much what we have on site.
Yeah.
There was the playground behind. We had some challenges in, the activities beside the monument, a fairly busy roadway and a fun and exciting playground for the kids. But we were able to, think about planting and ways of creating sort of quiet spaces for people. The monument is still is accessible from two main spaces, but you can walk through the field, sit and relax around the arrival plaza, and then spend time in the landscape surrounding. So
Yeah. So this is interesting. This is when when you replace those stairs, those entry stairs, with the existing landscape, so that people can't just walk in anywhere, but they need to come in from the north. So that looks like a significant change to the early concept.
I think there were challenges, and Rogerio, you might remember this better than I did. These conversations went on for a while.
Yeah, no, it was interesting because we, always thought of the monument as to have an entrance, does it have an exit. We thought, okay, how do we just let people experience the monument organically and not say you have to start here and you have to end here. So the staircase kind of alluded to that. But
Yeah.
then as we worked, to develop the landscape and we developed the arrival plaza, which is that grouping of trees right behind, right, that area there, we thought, okay, that would be a great place for an educator and students could be, have a moment where they could, have an educational experience.
Yeah.
And you still can, I don't recall exactly the specifics of how we ended up with that sequence the way it is, but as the project organically developed, the idea of having a place where you started made sense, and depending on how you move through the monument, you discover things abstractly. There's things on the sides like the chatterbox, which Daniel, I love, like we love that those ideas where people could sit next to each other and express whatever they're experiencing on the site. And you can discover things as you move through the monument itself. And then as you retreat or reverse back through, you sort of, there's another layer of discovery that happens in the opposite direction. So in the end, the idea of having this moment at the front, which sets the stage for the monument experience, started to make sense. And that's how that developed.
Yeah. Daniel, I think in one of our conversations, and this is a shot of the story wall that really sets up the beginning. And then on the flip side, there's more stories and steps that you can sit on. Here are the chatter boxes that Rogerio was talking about. But Daniel, you were talking early on about this zone in here where the traces are set up in a non-logical pattern, if you will, di disorienting layout. And I understood that that was supposed to mimic the disorientation that the community was going through at the time. Like, what's going on? Is
I think you bring to the experience whatever you feel like your experience, you're getting from it. So I think it was, the trace field, that sort of scattered approach
Yep,
to where the traces found themselves, was first inspired by, the candlelight vigils, like people marching, people protesting. So you'd get a mass of people at one end and sort of a scattering of people following. So it was this idea of movement across the site, a sort of slow discovery, disorientation, if you like. I mean, it means everything to everyone, I think.
gotcha.
And so the idea is to put things in place that resonate, can be interpreted in multi different ways, but that I and sort of and we discussed a lot about whether which field was where, and I think in one of the earlier sketches the mass was at this end of the experience, but through a discussion with Rogerio and Pham, this idea of slowly gathering information as you move through the field,
Yeah,
and the inform and honor field is the first, as the double field, and then memorialize at the end. You find yourself in a more a tighter knitted
yeah,
grouping,
yeah,
slightly intimidating, more monolithic, and that's the space we felt was right for a point of reflection and gravity. So it was, there were many iterations, and there were probably multiple ways in which we could go, but um, this is where we ended up, and certainly, like all projects, um, budgets and site restraints and just brevity during the day. You want everything all at once, but
Yeah.
as you move through a design process, you can pare things back and change things around and make it work better for the project. So
Yeah. And Jim, I think it's worth noting, given what Daniel just expressed, that linearity, that storytelling started when once we had that sort of in development, that was another reason to let go of the stairs and just have it be experienced in a particular direction. And for us and FAM, having gone through it, and Daniel also, I mean, all of us went through it, it was sort of a little bit like what we're experiencing now, even. It's like this level of disorientation because we didn't know how we were going to be able
Yep.
to deal with this. So
Yep.
that first field is really, tries to sort of mimic a little bit of that. And then you have these moments of clarity where you have the words on the traces that start, giving you a sense of direction. And like Daniel said, that memorialized field is when you find yourself in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And it tries to be overwhelming, but at the same time, you have this beautiful view of the sky, which kind of lifts you up and takes you into another, sort of sensibility altogether.
Yeah, and it's a real monument. You got San Vicente on one side and a playground on the other. It's
Yeah.
not you're not like isolated in some bubble. This is a real monument in a real place. The disorientation reminds me of Eisenman's Holocaust Plaza in Berlin. Where like all
mm,
these obelisks, tilting slightly just out of whack, and then boom, here you go into the center, and that for me, I could feel as much as I could feel about this issue not being a part of the original community. This is the strong point right in the center of that honor plaza. And then the this is that candlelight vigil that you were talking about, Daniel, that with each one of the traces, and Becky will talk about this in a moment, the lights are either facing northeast, south, and west. They're stationary. They don't move around, but adds another level to the monument. And as we described, and you taught me this in one of our conversations, it's one monument during the day, informative. It's another monument at night, more evocative. Could you expand?
yeah, sure. I think, I go back to my first experiences of West Hollywood before this project came along. I spent a lot of time there between 2006 and 2010. We had a small office there, and, the community was so rich and welcoming and vibrant, both daytime and nighttime. And it certainly um, felt like a place you wanted to be. And there was a richness to that community, and that holds true today. And so there's folks having lunch and heading to work or grabbing a coffee during the day and getting together, talking to mates, and then in the evening there's a whole nother life of long dinner parties, nights out, celebrations with friends. So we wanted, the global we fam and me as the designer, but we all wanted to make sure that idea that this could be inhabited at all times of the day and night was understood and represented in the design.
Interesting.
And the lights themselves, I think this programming got held. Becky would know more than I at this point, but they come on one at one at dusk until they're all lit up, and then at dawn they gradually go off one by one. That was the original concept. It might have moved in a little bit in delivery, but and the traces themselves are, you know, extremely slender, and I think we pushed that to the limits of the engineering and destroyed everyone in the process, yourself included, Jim.
Yeah.
I was looking back, we did 4 little timber models, and this one was the most slender and clearly the one that Sam and the designer wanted to go with. Probably not the fabricators, but
Very good. So this was the concept that was laid out, and then concepts are great, but if they're not built, they're just concepts. And so the next part of the conversation, we want to talk about taking concept into the built reality. And real briefly, the city had gone through a design build process on the AIDS monument, and the results were all over the board. Uh, Especially the cost, and there wasn't a real clear way of proceeding with this. And so they came back and they invited us to be involved in the design bid build process, which has its drawbacks as well. For those on the call that were involved with the rec center to the west here, that was a design bid build process. So it was very difficult because it's open to the public bid process. And there are some real challenges that can be found in that delivery methodology. And Rick D'Amato, one of my partners, came with this opportunity to do this, and that was my biggest concern. Well, you're basically asking, some trunk slammer to build the Washington Monument or the Vietnam Memorial. How can we really engage clear construction methodologies in a project as simple and as complex as this? So that was a real concern we had going in. So one avenue that the city chose to do is to engage in a hybrid delivery methodology where they bought the artwork separately. They bought these traces separately from. They had their own competition with the foundry folks on how they would make these traces and when they would deliver it to the field. And AFA out of Burbank or Glendale became the partner in the process, and they and Daniel Tobin have many conversations about the traces. We got some images of that, and so those were owner purchased, contractor installed elements that really helped with the design bid build uh, delivery methodology that was part of the success of the project. MGAC was brought in to oversee all of that. So forgive me from going from the lofty theoretical conversation about what the community was dealing with, and here we are literally talking about now the anchor bolts, but it's the process of having the vision come into play. And so these were some early tests of the siliconized bronze and the embossed words that we see in 30 of the traces in that mid field. And this is the coloration we saw in the renderings was more brassy in color. And here they've gone a little bit more bronze, and that was the direction that we wanted to proceed in. And one thing that we came across is that originally the traces were designed by Dana's group to be two-piece traces, where you have a stanchion coming up from below, and you bring the trace down over the top, and you tighten those with some bolts. And in a conversation I had with Dan, I said, and Dan was assigned under LPA. Basically, the city says, hey, make sure you bring beauty in on budget, Wyrick, LPA, and so we had a number of these conversations about, hey, Dan, can we shorten the height of this trace? Can we reduce the number of traces? And I just felt like the artist is just being whittled down, to a point where, how far can you take, how far can you find the vision without destroying the beauty. And so those were excellent conversations that we were able to have together. And we felt having a singular trace connected to the foundation anchor bolts was a less expensive way of going about it and a greater deterrent to some mischievous folks. So, Dan, do you have any
I mean,
scar tissue from those conversations?
no, I think I learned a lot from those
Yeah, me
conversations. I
too.
think
Yeah,
as the artist and also the design firm that delivered the initial drawing set, we totally overcomplicated that trace installation. We were absolutely, our engineer had made us petrified of both earthquakes
yeah,
and other things that might move the field or cause harm. And
yeah,
so it was totally over engineered, must have cost an absolute bomb to deliver. And um, so glad you were able to bring some brevity to that
yeah.
conversation.
That was Ben Ness, our in-house structural engineer, said, "Hey, if it's easy for me, it's easy for the fabricator. It's easy for the installer." And I thought there was wisdom there from Ben. So Daniel, I'm not sure if you were at the foundry, but here, this is all 3D printed traces in three pieces, and then they pull them together and they're welded and ground and put into a vise so they don't twist and turn um and it
Just
was really an interesting process.
Just a note from the foundry process, they're not printed in metal, though. They're printed in a PMMA wax, and then that's
Yeah,
cast and then put together.
yeah,
Yeah, it's amazing process. And
yeah,
they did an exceptional job,
yeah.
AFA.
Eric, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this process was kind of perhaps I think for me one of the more challenging ones because there was a lot of sort of reestablishing of our expectations, as you guys kind of would see. We kind of started with a prototyping process to see kind of what we wanted to end up with, and unfortunately, that prototype was actually first kept inside of the inside, and so we didn't get to experience how the dynamic changes was going to start occurring, especially with being kind of in like a live art form where there's going to be a patina that was going to start forming. And so as we started seeing them be fabricated and be converted from this kind of raw siliconized bronze to now being applied with the patina, we started seeing some of the challenges from our initial expectations. And we had to kind of reevaluate direction that we were going with and kind of see where we could go. And I know this is where Dan was also able to be at the foundry, and we were able to kind of see in place early on kind of the direction that we wanted it to take. Because as you could see, our original drawing, or sorry, the original traces were this kind of more brassy, kind of a yellowish tone, and we were starting to see that there were some kind of black specks and just different shadings that was appearing from the patina. And so there was this conversation where do we want to continue going this way or is there another solution? And I don't know if you can provide additional information on that as well, Dan. Your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that as the designer, I struggled through that period slightly, but the we were able to achieve, a great outcome. Going back to what the traces were meant to represent, they were meant to be imperfect.
Yeah,
While they were a field of, you know, identical traces, if you like, the surface and the color was meant to be imperfect. And of course, bronze is a living material. It oxidizes, it responds to the environment around it. I think seeing how the traces change over time is really important. And living with that space, going back to the monument in 5 years or 10 years when the vegetation has grown, the stonework has been aged and patinaed, and the same thing will happen with the traces.
yeah,
It's we all want something to be one way at the start, but we sometimes forget what is yet to come. And so I'm really interested in seeing the monument change over time and settle into the place it's inhabited.
Rogerio, you shared a thought and philosophy about how a project changes along the way.
Yes, are you referring to something specific?
Yeah, well, like this change of the finish or the patina on the traces, like it started with the image on the left and gravitated towards the image here. And it's like sometimes a project just goes a certain direction that you didn't see
Right.
see coming down the way.
Yeah,
It's
right.
what makes it so exciting.
Hey,
Yep.
Jim, we do have a question in chat. Would you
Yeah,
like me to read it?
please.
Okay. With any moment, with any monument, you all are mentioning it right now. How do you approach with security and safety with the monument? What is the plan with your team if someone damages the monument?
Well, I understand that the city has security at the monument almost on a full-time basis, and maybe Rick could speak to this. I think Rick's on. At least that was the last conversation that we had. And then we had, I think we cast some extra traces in case something went wrong. So, and then we have the travertine in case a stone, needs to be replaced or so we do have those backups.
Yeah, we've taken other safeguards, which will go unsaid. But we're all concerned about stupid people doing stupid things,
Yeah.
and that's my biggest concern, and I'm not alone there. So we've had lots of conversation with the city, and they're doing their best, obviously, to protect this because it needs to be there for a long time. So yeah, it's interesting where art is placed in a wide open social setting, and this monument isn't meant to be behind a tubular steel fence, if you will, with a lock on it. So with that openness comes some risk and currently the city is able to take on those risks. So
Mhm.
it's a good question. And City of West Hollywood has a number. This isn't the only art installation. They got a number of installations throughout and across the park that we'll see on our tour at the end of the month. A beautiful art installation that seems to be holding up well to all types of elements. So, Rogerio, I'm not sure if we cut you off on this conversation of a project sometimes ducking and weaving as it goes through the process, but
I mean, I'm not sure I have much to add to that.
yeah,
I think you sort of captured it, and so did Daniel. The initial idea and where we ended up differed, and there's enough similarities that, you see the through line. But right, what we had hoped, the finish would be and what it ended up becoming were two different things. But in the end, it all kind of headed in the right direction. And sometimes the thought process needs to evolve, you know, by force in some ways, and in other ways, it's like,
yeah,
just organically, it just kind of works.
yeah,
The design process definitely reflected that. And then, how the patina kind of ended up. And then we also at one point discussed travertine versus
yeah,
granite and, sustainability. And that was sort of my little mantra. I was like, let's use California granite because I don't want to bring more travertine from Turkey or Italy to Los Angeles. But at that point, the idea of using a dark granite and finding that it was strange that the availability of that stone, it was easier to get the travertine than it's actually even to get something local. So all those conversations
yeah,
happened, and we ended up where we ended up, and we're happy with the result.
yeah.
There were twists and turns along the way, most certainly.
If we can flip back real fast, a fun fact that Daniel and his group taught us is that these traces are 4x4, 4x4 on the base and 3x3 at the top. But the walls taper from 3/8 of an inch to a quarter of an inch for rigidity And I might have been asleep during structures at that time, but I thought that was a really interesting way to resolve the L over R ratio, right? On these traces. So that was really interesting. Um, and then we've got the bronze plaque in the middle of the honor plaza that we needed to coordinate with the bronze and had to be slip resistant and durable, and should it be stone, should it be bronze? Those were great conversations. Here's the original site before the monument arrived, and the right hand photo is to the right is the PDC. So it's 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 an urban installation. Here's the simplicity and the complexity of the layout. And we borrowed some trees from the park to wrap the ends of the monument, give it some a natural portal into the place. And then here's that protest podium that was been discussed, prominently positioned for it to be activated. We got an outlet for a bullhorn and everything there, so it's ready to go. I'm not sure if it's been used yet. And then as Rogerio talked about, yeah, the granite versus travertine, the dark versus light, the durable versus soft. There's a whole gradation in that area, and as well as the veining, as you can see in the upper left-hand side, how it can obscure the clarity of of the messaging. And so we bumped into that a little bit. Eric, again, you were deeply involved in this. Your thoughts?
This is another one of those things where, you have certain expectations kind of coming into it, and then you have to also adjust depending on kind of what you end up getting. You know, us having to try to understand the application of this engraving on stone that has not yet arrived and that we're not able to go and select was also one of the challenges. We were trying to convey kind of the type of stone that we wanted, especially you can see like you were mentioning on the top left. If we start having to engrave on some of the more important areas, we wanted to have sort of more of the pristine stone to have more of a kind of clarity on there. But as you kind of were starting to see, we started seeing some challenges on even legibility. Because as we learned, as you start engraving and cutting into the travertine, you start getting a different tone within it, and it doesn't necessarily contrast as well as you would want in the areas in certain occasions.
So as Rogerio talked about, we wanted a local stone, but those end up being black, gray, red that you would see in so many, forgive me, tombstones in a graveyard. And so we moved away from that. We didn't want to be pure white like one would find closer to the Getty. So we wanted this in between. And for sustainability reasons, we wanted it local as we could get. So, okay, we can't get the blonde stone in California. Where else can we get? So we threw it out to the marketplace and we got some options from Mexico and from Indiana. But if you wanted to save some money, you would get it from Turkey, and it was $150,000 less expensive to import it from Turkey. And that's where, and we've all been there. That's when your principals are arguing with your purse, right? And so we chose to go, unfortunately, offshore for stewardship reasons, and sank it with PCL. Was on vacation, seeing his family in India. On his way back, he stopped off at the quarry in Turkey, and we had a midnight FaceTime call where he had the test sample in his hand, holding up to the stone there, and we said, "Yeah, looks good. Let's go." And the clock's ticking, and so we were able to procure that travertine in the right spot, and it would come in phases onto the project. And then as we refined the font, the small font ended up being not bold enough to be legible, and the lowercase has these little finicky options uh, that are more susceptible. So we went with the bold uppercase throughout, as in this word monument here. And yet when we put it up on this particular slab, as Eric said, it was more visually variated than the others. And so it became difficult to read. And so we were able to obtain a stain, if you will, or
Feeler.
a sealer that put the sealer here. And I remember Rick Amundsen came out, and we were all concerned. And he take a look at this. He just looked at me and exhaled, and kind of like, okay, we can make this work. So again, as we're talking about within the limits that you have to go, we were able to find success on this. A few more slides, and then we want to wrap up with any more Q&A that you guys have. But this shows the complexity of the layout with the power and control conduits coming up from below. And the layout was simply complex. And the contractor says, hey, I can't figure it out. Can I come down to your office and work it out? I go, but you're a public bid contractor. And he was all in, young guy, Adrian, that was just, when the contractor realizes it's not a self-storage complex in La Fuente, but this is for keeps, that's what you want. And that's what we were able to get in PCL through a public bid process. We really got fortunate. And then he sent these other photographs, the two on the right, of the conduits and the rebar weaving up and under, and I just thought those shots were excellent. Becky, walk us through your process here for the
Well, you
lighting.
can you go back one? So
Yeah.
what was important for lighting was that we had to have separate conduits for the DMX control, which was in every single trace. And you have an input and an output. So that's two conduits. And then we had to have line voltage power, which is another two conduits. We had four conduits going up to each trace. And that had to be laid out. They couldn't cross. If they crossed, then we would have voltage leak. And it was very imperative that they got this color coded and installed correctly.
Yeah, they did a great job.
Yeah, we worked with our civil team to make sure to get survey points for each one of those. So they actually brought a full survey team to locate the exact center points of those. So that way they have very little margin of error when they slip over the trace.
Yeah, and then what you're seeing now is we really wanted to make sure that the programming was imperative into the lighting design and the overall feel of the monument. So in our construction documents, so that the bid contractor would understand how complex the programming and infrastructure required, we had the color changing scenes that were for just the standard everyday. We ended up speeding it up, so it's actually like half an hour, so that somebody walking through the monument can experience the entire scene in its completion. We have an RGB light fixture at the top of every trace so that we can mimic the exact flicker and effect of flame, including an amber and a blue infill to kind of get you that whole breath of flickering. And the ambient light was done by just a side light grazing across the floor. You can go to the next slide. This is more about, like we were talking about, how it connects with the overall building and the West Hollywood sign that's attached on into the park. So we wanted to tie them by just awareness holidays, which the city is still reviewing to see what they're ultimately going to decide to go with. But we wanted to make sure that they had options.
And they've got plenty of options.
We actually only have awareness days programmed right now for the monument. It's only about like 5 scenes. The West Hollywood sign has over 30 different programs based on the time of year and holidays. So it's quite a vast variety. And then
Was the drone changed everything or what? Look at that shot. Isn't that awesome?
so we were able to get like code compliant lighting with just the one side of light sweeping across the entire monument. And we did that on purpose. We wanted low level so that really it shined, the traces shined, and the light of the fire effect really, really brought it all together. So I remember when I presented this to Dan, he's like, "Oh, you can do that?" And I'm all, "Yeah, we can." It was,
They work really well. It was a big problem to solve, I thought at the time. So amazing that you succeeded. It makes me smile very broadly.
it was definitely a problem because we were worried that you would have to light it with poles and surround and flood the space with lighting, which would distract from the traces. So um, I'm very, very happy with the success of that.
And similarly with the shadow boxes and the narrative tablets, that lighting has
You just see them pop.
worked beautifully.
Yeah.
Well, this also brought into a point too, is that when Dan and I were talking, I didn't want to light everything that was part of that element. Like I specifically, we did not light the plaque in the middle of the memorial traces in the back. We did not light the top of the chatter boxes. We did not light even the protest stadium podium because we wanted those areas to be part of the day experience, and we didn't want to flood the monument with light as well. We wanted it to be curated.
They're really beautiful choices, Becky. Thank you. Amazing. Congratulations.
I'm glad you're happy with it. I I'm really happy with how it came out. I'm glad we were able to make the RGBA work. Originally, the design was just white light, and I'm like, we could do better.
I like these crisscrossing shadows. It looks like a Burberry scarf, you know. It's just something that happens that adds a new texture to it.
Yeah, that was a happy accident. It
Yeah.
wasn't until we were on site that we realized that the ambient light really created this texture, which even is more encapsulating at night when you're
Yeah.
there.
We've got a video here. Hopefully it goes across smoothly to the viewers, but um and you can narrate all this, Becky.
Yeah, so we really wanted to showcase the West Hollywood connection, the Trace connection, the way that the lights, each one of those are individually addressed and programmed so that as you walk throughout the entire monument, you get an effect of what's happening and you almost become part of that scene because each one is different for perspective. We have an amazing programmer that was able to program each one to turn on independently and they flicker independently. So you're not going to see two trace lights doing the same thing at the same time. Unless it's a colored scene, but in the general overall lighting with the flicker, you're not. So we're really happy with how that came out.
This is a shot at the ribbon cutting, which I just thought was just fantastic. This lady is taking a picture of the bronze plaque in the middle of the memorialized plaza and sending it to somebody. And I just thought that was a really wonderful picture. And then, as we talked about, there's 30 traces that have a word inscribed in it, and these words are carefully selected. And so, with the bronze going darker, you kind of have to seek these out, and they become uh, another layer of information and inspiration and reminder of the overall process. Here's a shot at the ribbon cutting with the nice reflection off the wet travertine, which I thought looked beautiful. And again, people who have been waiting a long time for this concept to become constructed. I think it was received well. And Rogerio, your thoughts? How's the community receiving it so far? And
I haven't heard anything negative. And it's interesting generationally. Obviously, people who lived through the 80s and the epidemic and are still living through it, they very much appreciate the fact that they have a place where they can memorialize or commemorate, the person that they have lost. A lot of people are leaving, mementos. Like recently, somebody left a photograph of someone with a note and personal items. So we're now trying to figure out what we will do with these, with these items because they now need to be stored somewhere. And then another interesting story that I think I shared when we last talked, we were after the opening, we were at a restaurant and, my friends and I were talking about the monument opening and the waiter who was maybe 23 years old is like, what are you guys talking about? And we said, the AIDS monument just opened. He's like, oh, you mean the AIDS sticks? And we all started laughing because we realized, oh, here we are. This is exactly the generation that we need to educate. They have no clue, kind of what happened in the 80s. And there's another, there was a perfect sort of moment where it was like, yes, we need to take you to the monument and show you what we've all gone through so you understand how we evolved to where we are today. So yeah, it's been received well. One institute is now taking over the programming, and they are now hiring a person dedicated to the programming of the monument, which will include educational experiences or educational opportunities and art installations and all the types of things that we will develop over the next several years to make the monument an active participant in the community and have the community actively participate with the monument.
Nice. Daniel, it's kind of a unfair question, but from beginning with those sketches that you did to this installation, I'm sure there's been surprises and disappointments along the way, but your thoughts?
Unfortunately, I haven't got to site because yet in to see it finished
Oh, you should go.
because
You should
of
go.
some family commitments in Australia. But I did sneak into site when it was almost complete. Adrian let me in one morning. I've told Rogerio and you this story. And it was all but finished. And wandering through that space and seeing experiencing the scale of it, the quality of materials, it certainly felt like we had been true to the brief. Ourselves as designers, LPA, the city, I think what's been created is some, fantastic spaces to inhabit and connection to stories, obviously, connection to people lost. I think, from my perspective, extraordinarily excited and pleased with the result. It's a lot, many things get discarded through a process, but much more would retain. So it's thrilling to see it built.
Great. Then to the academic, all of our projects go through project goals of performance, wellness, experience, and community. And I think for this one, it's really probably arguably the most important is the place of reflection, the place of healing, and that what makes this project so rewarding for those of us at LPA to be engaged with you all. For those interested to dig deeper, visit the AIDS Monument webpage to learn more of those stories and more about the background of the monument itself. Any closing thoughts? Q&A. Rogerio, Daniel, Rick.
I mean, it was an honor to be part of the project. Having gone through the 80s and we all have horror stories, but no one at any age should go through what you went through at that time when you were burying friends every weekend. And in my case, taking a friend down from a noose that he had made with a tie.
Mm.
I would sit next to Frank Israel. He was my thesis advisor in architecture school, and he had full lesions on his face, and he died a few years later. I mean, they're really rough stories, and to have a place to sort of think through experience all those feelings again in a safe place is really meaningful. And then to be part of that with those, part of the development of the monument with those memories in my mind, it does, it is a healing process.
Yeah,
And it is a healing site.
very good. Well, I think we should just close it right there. Rogerio, thank you for sharing your heart with us. Again, Rick, thank you for inviting the LPA to be involved with this undertaking. It's been an honor for all of us. All right.
Yeah, well, thank you, Jim, and to all the team. It was a profound experience for all of us, and from the city side to be able to be a part of delivering Daniel's vision
Yeah.
and FAM's, aspirations. It was such a great partnership where everybody was pulling in the same direction.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a very special thing to have been part of, and appreciate all your work.
Very good. All right, everybody. Jeff, I think we are good to go. We're going to give back people 15 minutes of their time. Rick, make sure you submit your learning unit thing, or they might question your
absolutely. That's
FAIA
right.
status.
Rick, if you think of it, just email me. I mean, I know you're here, and I'll just try and make sure. Jim, same with you. There is a question here, and I actually reached out to Joe, said, "Hey, this is a great one for the end. Has this AIDS monument inspired other future developments of AIDS monuments in California, and how about the rest of the country?"
I could probably take that one. One of the things I learned in the process of sort of working with Daniel and developing the monument is that apparently it takes about 20 years after a pandemic or a disaster or something for people to be able to reflect back onto an event and be able to sort of process it psychologically. So in regards to this question, I don't know of any project or any other AIDS monument that has been specifically inspired by ours. But what I am understanding is that many communities like Palm Springs, and I've been working with the team in Waikiki, are developing their own monument, and smaller cities are starting to develop their own monument. So I think it's more of a factor, sort of a psychological sort of process that everybody goes through, and you have a chance to reflect, and then people create these sites where you can go and leave your memories and and have a process of healing take place. So it's not a direct answer to the question, but it seems like how the process works and why things are starting to pop up around the country and around the world, actually.
There was one other comment. It wasn't a question, it was really a comment, but I think it should be read. I love the idea that the material is understood as and intended to be individual as a people they celebrate.
Great to hear. I think it was a very important part of the monument, and wonderful that it's out there in the world now. So great to hear that.
Very good. Thank you all. Thank you, everyone,
Thank you
for your time. Rogerio, Daniel, Rick, Jeff, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.